What made Tyler Perry, Hollywood's king of compassion, slam the door on Meghan Markle when she asked for help? In a stunning twist no one saw coming, Meghan Markle privately approached Tyler Perry, the very man who once sheltered her from royal chaos, asking for free access to his Atlanta studios to shoot a film eerily mirroring her time in the palace. But what he read in her script left him so disturbed, he reportedly blacklisted the entire project. Why did Perry back away so fast? What exactly was in Meghan's royal escape story that crossed the line? And how did private emails and leaked scripts expose everything? Stay with us. This gets explosive. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The early morning sun rose quietly over Atlanta, spilling soft light across the massive black gates of Tyler Perry Studios. From the outside, it was calm. A peaceful Hollywood fortress nestled in the heart of the American South. But inside the executive wing, something far less serene was unfolding. A proposal had landed on Tyler Perry's desk. Not just any proposal, but a bold film script attached to an equally bold request from Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex. She wanted space. Not just metaphorical space, but literal access to Perry's production empire, one of the largest black-owned film studios in the world. Her ask? Free reign over a soundstage to produce what her people described as a deeply personal and emotionally powerful drama. But as Perry flipped through the pages, it didn't take long for the polished Hollywood surface to give way to something that disturbed him. This wasn't just another pitch. This was a cinematic grenade. The script, according to insiders, painted a thinly veiled portrait of a biracial royal woman imprisoned in a palace of secrets and cruelty, her life micromanaged by a cold institution and racially biased handlers. Though names were changed, the parallels were glaring. The protagonist's journey mirrored Meghan's own public fallout with the British monarchy, from isolation and depression to a daring escape into self-empowerment. Dialogue lines and dramatic turns felt like quotes lifted from Meghan's interviews and press appearances. And it wasn't just the content that left Perry uneasy. It was the intent. The question hanging in the air wasn't about artistic integrity or even creative freedom. The deeper concern for Perry was about weaponization, turning art into a vehicle for personal revenge. After years of building a studio rooted in healing, faith, and upliftment, Tyler Perry reportedly wanted no part in helping anyone settle a royal score. Least of all through a production that many would inevitably interpret as another assault on the British royal family. This wasn't the first time Perry had extended a hand to Meghan and Harry. Back in 2020, when the couple fled the UK amid media firestorms and royal estrangement, it was Tyler who opened his doors. He offered them his Beverly Hills mansion, his security detail, and his silence. He didn't seek credit. He didn't even appear in interviews. His involvement was a quiet act of compassion for two people in crisis. But compassion has its limits, and Perry had reached his. According to one high-level studio executive, the response from Tyler was measured but firm. He declined. Not only would Meghan not be getting a studio lot for free, but Perry also didn't want his company, his brand, or his name associated with any project that could be perceived as politically explosive. He's not interested in royal drama, the executive stated. He gave her shelter when she needed it. That chapter's closed. But the fallout from that refusal has opened an entirely new story, one far more complex, and far more telling about how power, celebrity, and perception intertwine in the post-royal world of Meghan Markle. At the center of it is a woman who once stood on a global balcony, hailed as a modern Cinderella who brought diversity and a breath of fresh air to the ancient walls of Buckingham Palace. That glow didn't last. Today, Meghan's public image is a battlefield. For her supporters, she's a survivor of a rigid and prejudiced institution. For her critics, she's an opportunist leveraging her trauma to build a brand. But perhaps the more pressing reality lies somewhere in the middle. A woman trying to wrestle back control of her narrative in a world that now questions every move she makes. Tyler Perry, meanwhile, represents a different kind of royalty. Hollywood royalty. A media mogul whose rise from homelessness to global influence has made him a symbol of grit, grace, and God-centered ambition. His studio isn't just a workspace, it's a monument to Black success, legacy, and responsibility. He has partnered with Oprah, built bridges with major networks, and supported political leaders. His reputation is currency, and every decision he makes reverberates beyond the gates of his empire. That's what makes this rejection significant. It's not about money. Meghan reportedly didn't ask for a budget, only space. It's not about fame, both are global icons. And it's not even about content alone. It's about trust, about values, about one person saying to another, I helped you once, but this isn't a road I can walk with you. For those who follow royal developments closely, the script rejection feels like a turning point. Meghan has spent the past few years building a brand that stands apart from royalty, championing female empowerment, equity, and mental health through documentaries, books, and podcasts. But this proposed film project, insiders say, marked a shift in tone. It was raw, personal, and potentially inflammatory. A dramatized retelling of her royal experience, told not through memoir, but through movie magic. The danger, at least in Perry's eyes, was not only in the story itself, but in the consequences it could unleash. If the film went forward, and if Tyler's name was on it, even by association, it could invite backlash from multiple directions: the royal family, their supporters, the UK press, and even moderate American audiences exhausted by royal feuds. More critically, it could blur the lines between art and vengeance in a way that felt less like healing and more like hostility. Meghan, according to those familiar with the situation, was surprised by the rejection. She had seen Perry as not just a past ally, but a creative mentor and a potential safe harbor for her storytelling ambitions. She believed the script would resonate with audiences who had lived through isolation, prejudice, and institutional silencing. She framed the project as a form of justice, not vendetta. But that's not how Perry saw it. Sources say there was no big argument, no scandalous shouting match, just a decisive no. Still, the story didn't end there. Leaked excerpts from the film proposal soon began circulating in entertainment circles. Plot details matched public events too closely to ignore. A royal couple's secret battles with palace aides, frantic late-night escapes, suicide ideation, tabloid manipulation, and royal racism. Characters wore different names, but they echoed the voices of Harry, William, Charles, Kate, and the late Queen. The emotional core was Meghan's, and everyone in the industry knew it. Within days, speculation exploded. Media outlets questioned Meghan's next move. Would she take the project elsewhere? Would she fund it herself? Was this just the beginning of a multi-part media strike against the crown? And through it all, Tyler Perry stayed silent. No official statement. No tweet. No leak from his camp beyond a single word. Declined. His silence spoke volumes. At a time when every move in Meghan's life seems to be either praised or weaponized, Perry's refusal offered something rare: boundaries. A line drawn not out of anger, but out of wisdom. A decision made not from a desire to hurt, but a deep need to protect. And that's what this video is here to explore. What exactly happened behind the scenes? Why did Meghan approach Tyler now? What was in that script that made him say no? And what does this mean for Meghan's future as a Hollywood producer and as a public figure straddling the line between royalty and rebellion? In the next chapter, we'll dive deep into the background. How Meghan's Hollywood ambitions evolved, what Tyler Perry once represented to her, and why this clash could signal a larger shift in the power dynamics of post-royal storytelling. Long before tiaras, tabloids, and televised interviews, Meghan Markle was a struggling actress in Hollywood, navigating the brutal world of typecasting, backroom auditions, and dead-end roles. She wasn't handed anything. Her early career was a mosaic of small gigs, brief appearances in shows like CSI, New York, and Fringe, minor parts that never let her speak more than a few lines. For over a decade, she played briefcases on Deal or No Deal, endured audition after audition, and wrestled with the harsh truth many actresses of color face in the industry. She was either not black enough or not white enough for most casting directors. Despite the obstacles, Meghan kept pushing. Her breakthrough came in 2011, when she landed the role of Rachel Zane on the legal drama Suits. It wasn't a major network hit, but it was a significant step. The role gave Meghan what she had long craved: visibility, steady income, and, more importantly, legitimacy. She was no longer just another hopeful actress in Los Angeles. She was now part of a series with an international audience, shooting 9 months a year in Toronto, with a fan base that began following her every red carpet move and Instagram post. Behind the scenes, though, Meghan always dreamed of something bigger than acting. Acting was just a stepping stone to what she really wanted: influence, creative control, and the ability to tell the kind of stories that reflected her world, stories that major studios weren't yet greenlighting. She'd seen how women like Reese Witherspoon, Kerry Washington, and Ava DuVernay transitioned from actresses to media moguls. Meghan wanted the same. She didn't want to just read from scripts, she wanted to write them, to produce them, to own them. But building that kind of influence takes time, connections, and capital. And at the time, Meghan was still fighting to keep her name in rooms that mattered. She was running a lifestyle blog, The TIG, cultivating a personal brand centered around wellness, empowerment, and sophisticated simplicity. She was working with charities, volunteering overseas, and leveraging her growing fame for social causes. It was clear that her interests extended far beyond a Hollywood soundstage. She was drawn to activism, politics, and cultural change. Acting was becoming more of a platform than a passion. When she met Prince Harry in 2016, everything changed. Suddenly, Meghan was catapulted into a new dimension of fame, one she couldn't have planned for. Her face was on front pages across continents. The media began dissecting her background, her family, her past relationships, even her ancestry. Hollywood quickly stepped back. The actress was now a royal fiancée, and soon, a duchess. It seemed as though her dreams of producing and creative independence would be swallowed by the expectations of royal life. But Meghan, as the world would discover, was not interested in playing a supporting role in someone else's script. Her departure from royal life, what came to be known as Megxit, wasn't just about tabloid pressure or family feuds. At its core, it was about regaining autonomy. Meghan had spent her adult life building a voice, a brand, a vision. Royal protocol clipped those wings. The Duchess title came with prestige, but it also came with silence. She could no longer speak freely about causes she cared about. She couldn't endorse products, run social media accounts, or pursue her entrepreneurial goals. The palace, she later explained, took away her passport, her keys, her voice. So when she and Harry stepped down from their royal duties in 2020 and moved to North America, it wasn't a retreat, it was a pivot. For the first time in years, Meghan had the chance to return to her original dream, but now with a level of fame and global recognition no Hollywood press tour could have manufactured. She wasn't just an actress anymore. She was a brand. That same year, Meghan and Harry launched Archwell Productions, a media company aimed at producing inspiring programming that informs, elevates, and entertains. The name, derived from their son Archie and the Greek word archi, meaning source of action, was a statement of purpose. Meghan and Harry were now media creators in their own right, and they had no intention of going small. But ambition alone isn't enough in Hollywood. Studios need infrastructure. Creators need access. Producers need studios, sound stages, technicians, and trusted partnerships. That's where Meghan hit her first roadblock. Despite their fame, the Sussexes were still outsiders to the tight-knit, highly competitive ecosystem of the Hollywood elite. Their Netflix deal raised eyebrows, reportedly worth over $100 million. But within industry circles, it was met with cautious curiosity rather than enthusiasm. Could they actually deliver compelling content? Or were they just famous names with no real production experience? Meghan's first major appearance after the royal split was her interview with Oprah Winfrey in March 2021. It was one of the most watched events in television history, and it reopened all the wounds between her and the British monarchy. To some, it was a brave act of truth-telling. To others, it was a theatrical airing of dirty laundry. But for Meghan, it marked a key transition from royal figure to public storyteller. From that moment forward, she began positioning herself not as a victim, but as a voice. In the following months, Archwell released a handful of projects: a docuseries on Harry's mental health with Oprah, a Netflix special titled Harry and Meghan's short-lived podcast, Archetypes. While these efforts garnered mixed reviews, they all had one thing in common. They revolved around the Sussexes' own lives, perspectives, and struggles. This made the content intensely personal, but also limiting. It raised questions. Were they producing content or building a brand around their trauma? And how long could that well sustain? Inside Hollywood, Meghan's name began triggering split reactions. Younger producers admired her for breaking free from an outdated system. Executives were more wary. Was she here to collaborate or to control the narrative? Was she a visionary or a liability? The tide was uncertain, but Meghan wasn't deterred. She kept writing, developing, pitching. In late 2023, she quietly began workshopping a scripted film idea, one that reflected a woman's journey through royal chaos and personal transformation. Though it was initially presented as fiction, early readers quickly noticed uncanny parallels to Meghan's own life. The storyline followed a mixed-race American woman who marries into a centuries-old royal family and finds herself ensnared in a web of isolation, jealousy, and institutional sabotage. She eventually breaks free, moves abroad, and reclaims her identity as a filmmaker and humanitarian. This was not subtle. It was, by design, provocative. Meghan believed the world was ready for it. She felt her story had been warped, twisted, and manipulated by both British tabloids and global media. If the Crown wouldn't let her tell the truth in her own words, then she would tell it in character. Fiction gave her the freedom to say what royal life never permitted her to say out loud. And with the industry slowly opening to more female-driven, racially diverse narratives, Meghan saw an opportunity to finally claim her space, not just as a subject, but as an author. But Hollywood is a place of gatekeepers. And before anything could move forward, she needed infrastructure. She needed someone who believed in her. She needed a studio. That's when she called Tyler Perry. And what happened next would expose a divide deeper than just creative differences. It would reveal the limits of allegiance, the boundaries of empathy, and the unpredictable cost of turning real pain into scripted drama. To understand the depth of the current fracture between Meghan Markle and Tyler Perry, one must rewind to a pivotal period in 2020 when the world, unknowingly, stood on the edge of both a global pandemic and a royal rupture that would rewrite the future of the British monarchy. It was during this liminal time, when uncertainty defined everything, that Tyler Perry stepped in as a silent savior. When Meghan and Prince Harry announced their intention to step back from royal duties in early January 2020, the world was stunned. The announcement, posted on their now-defunct Sussex Royal Instagram account, was clinical in tone, but seismic in implication. The couple didn't just want to reduce their royal workload. They wanted financial independence, geographical freedom, and the right to control their own narrative. Behind that carefully worded statement was a far more desperate truth. They were scrambling for refuge. Enter Tyler Perry. Unlike traditional Hollywood moguls who build their empires through studio connections and inherited privilege, Perry carved his path with sweat, faith, and relentless storytelling. A playwright turned filmmaker, his Medea franchise may have drawn criticism from purists, but it made him a billionaire. More importantly, it made him a brand synonymous with second chances and redemption. He had built his own studio in Atlanta, not just a film lot, but a sprawling campus constructed on a former Confederate Army base. That symbolism wasn't lost on Perry or his community. It was a declaration that Black excellence had found permanent ground. So when Meghan and Harry reached a breaking point and found themselves between countries, between homes, and increasingly vulnerable to paparazzi and political fallout, it was Tyler Perry, quietly, with no fanfare, who offered them shelter. He opened up his Beverly Hills mansion to them. He provided them with private security. He didn't ask for a public thank you, a media mention, or even acknowledgement. For Perry, it was about doing the right thing. He later stated in rare comments that he saw a couple in distress, especially Meghan, and felt compelled to step in. He believed they were being hounded unjustly and understood the psychological toll that kind of scrutiny could take. It was more than kindness, it was solidarity. At the time, Meghan and Harry were quietly grateful. That mansion became a cocoon from the madness. While the press speculated about where they had fled, the couple began regrouping. In that home, they planned their next moves. In that sanctuary, Meghan began to heal from what she later described as the darkest period of her life. Perry had no obligation to help, and yet he did, without asking anything in return. That gesture changed everything. It made Perry a critical part of their post-royal chapter. When the couple welcomed their daughter Lilibet Diana in 2021, Tyler Perry was reportedly asked to be her godfather. Though he never confirmed it publicly, those close to him suggested he was touched by the request, if a bit surprised. After all, his relationship with the couple was relatively new, but such was the level of trust they had placed in him. But trust is a fragile thing, especially when it collides with business, ambition, and legacy. In the months and years that followed the initial refuge Perry offered, the Sussexes expanded their American footprint. They purchased a lavish estate in Montecito, secured multi-million-dollar deals with Spotify and Netflix, and launched Archwell Productions. Meghan began slowly re-entering the public eye, appearing in interviews, on podcasts, and in philanthropic endeavors. Still, She remained closely tied to the narrative of being silenced and mistreated by the crown. This narrative was, in many ways, effective. It garnered sympathy, headlines, and opened doors in Hollywood that might have remained shut to a former cable television actress. But it also began to wear thin in certain circles. Media executives started whispering that the Sussex brand was rooted too heavily in victimhood. Some critics argued that the couple, especially Meghan, was trading royalty for relevance and trauma for traction. Still, her supporters insisted she was simply reclaiming a voice once taken. Amid this tension, Meghan sought to expand her storytelling reach beyond documentary and memoir. She envisioned a fictionalized account of her royal experience, not a documentary or a docudrama, but a scripted, high-production value film that could spark conversation and challenge institutions. For that, she needed more than a camera crew. She needed a production space that could shield her from press leaks, offer discretion, and provide top-tier resources. She thought of Tyler Perry. It wasn't just about logistics. Meghan reportedly saw Perry as a spiritual ally, a man who had faced systemic rejection, built his own lane, and created art on his own terms. She believed that he would understand her creative mission, not just as a producer, but as someone who had once given her sanctuary when the world seemed to collapse. Their shared history was meant to be a bridge to collaboration, but things didn't unfold the way she expected. When Meghan reached out with her script and proposal, it was done privately. There was no press release, no official pitch deck blasted through industry channels. According to those with knowledge of the exchange, it was a direct appeal, a deeply personal ask to use one of Perry's soundstages at his Atlanta-based studio, rent-free, or at an extreme discount. The reason? Meghan wanted to retain full creative control and avoid studio interference. She saw Perry's studio as the ideal place, secure, outside Hollywood's usual radar, and operated by someone who had once taken her in without judgment. But Tyler Perry had evolved since that day in 2020. His priorities had shifted. His empire had grown, and with it, the stakes of every project that entered his walls. His name wasn't just a signature. It was a seal, one that implied endorsement, alignment, and investment. And when he read through the draft Meghan had submitted, he reportedly felt his gut tighten. It wasn't just fiction. It was fury. Beautifully written, yes. Emotionally raw, absolutely. But beneath the surface of artistry lay something else, a calculated strike. Tyler Perry, known for scripting redemptive arcs and healing journeys, now found himself staring at a screenplay that, by many measures, felt like a cinematic reckoning aimed at one of the most historically respected institutions in the world. And he wanted no part of it. From the moment he finished reading, Perry knew what his answer would be. And while Meghan may have expected alignment, what she received instead was a boundary. There were no angry calls, no bridges burned overnight. But Perry, through his representatives, declined the proposal. It was polite, professional, and absolute. He reportedly explained that he didn't want his facilities or brand associated with any content that could be interpreted as politically or culturally incendiary. Not because he didn't support Meghan's right to tell her story, but because he believed there were better, more constructive ways to do it. Insiders say Perry feared the film could reopen wounds in a way that hurt more than helped. That it would not only invite attacks from royalists and critics, but also put his studio, built on values of family, faith, and growth, at the center of a media storm. He wasn't interested in being part of another high-profile royal expose. He had given Meghan what she needed once, a roof, a refuge, and a shield. But that moment had passed. He chose his studio's reputation over a royal narrative, his legacy over loyalty. And in doing so, he changed the tone of their relationship. For Meghan, the rejection came as a shock. According to close sources, she had believed Perry would be among the few in Hollywood who understood the weight of what she was trying to say. That he would see this not as scandal, but as storytelling, raw, brave, and essential. She saw the film as a mirror for women around the world trapped in institutions that crush identity. She didn't view it as vengeance. She viewed it as vision. But Perry saw something else. He saw fire disguised as cinema. A script too close to personal reality. A project destined to be read less as fiction and more as fact. He saw a wave coming, a tabloid tidal wave, royal lawyers, endless press inquiries, and he chose to stay on shore. And that, more than any single line in the script, signaled the end of a certain kind of alliance. The script was called The Institution, and from the moment its first few pages were quietly passed around a small circle of trusted producers, it became clear this was not just a story. It was a statement. Written under a pseudonym and guarded with the kind of secrecy typically reserved for blockbuster franchises, the screenplay marked Meghan Markle's most daring creative endeavor since her royal exit. But the anonymity didn't last long. Within days of its circulation, whispers and executive suites connected the dots. The writer was Meghan. The character was her. And the palace in the story? Unmistakably Buckingham. The premise was simple on the surface but layered in meaning. The story followed an American woman of mixed race who marries into a powerful European dynasty. At first, she's embraced with open arms, or so it seems. But soon after the honeymoon period ends, she is caught in a web of restrictions, backroom politics, veiled racism, and emotional gaslighting. Her voice is minimized. Her every move is monitored. Public appearances are orchestrated with surgical precision. The media turns against her. Her mental health begins to unravel. Sound familiar? To industry insiders who got a sneak peek, the comparisons were immediate. This wasn't an inspired tale. It was a mirror, polished to reflect Meghan's lived experience. The male lead bore an uncanny resemblance to Prince Harry, a red-haired royal torn between his duty to the crown and his loyalty to his wife. The cold, institutional advisors resembled figures long rumored to be power players in the British palace machine. Even the central antagonist, a steely-eyed matriarch draped in tradition, invoked shades of Queen Elizabeth II, albeit cloaked under fictional names and slightly altered biographical details. At the core of the script was a message. Institutions crush individuality. Tradition suffocates modernity. And silence is violence when it's enforced by protocol. It was bold. It was fiery. And for many, it was deeply personal. The project was pitched as a psychological drama with thriller elements, a kind of royal get-out crossed with The Crown and The Handmaid's Tale. Meghan wanted it to be both cinematic and symbolic. She envisioned muted color palettes to reflect emotional numbness, sweeping palace interiors filmed like cages, and stark close-ups to capture the protagonist's descent into paranoia and despair. Her heroine would not be a passive victim, though. This character would rise, find her voice, and ultimately break free, not just physically, but spiritually from the institution that tried to erase her. Meghan's team believed the film would resonate with women worldwide, particularly those from marginalized backgrounds who faced similar battles for validation and autonomy in systems designed to suppress them. To them, the palace wasn't just the British monarchy, it was any corporate boardroom, any patriarchal family, any societal structure that rewards obedience and punishes defiance. But there was a darker subtext to the film that couldn't be ignored. While Meghan insisted that the characters were fictional and the events dramatized, the screenplay never distanced itself far enough from real-world references. There was a scene of a royal aide coaching the protagonist to smile through pain, even as she crumbles inside. A family meeting where members coldly debate whether the Duchess' popularity poses a threat to the hierarchy. An explosive interview where the central couple attempts to reclaim the narrative, only to face media backlash more vicious than ever before. To those outside Meghan's inner circle, the film looked less like fiction and more like an open wound turned into screenplay format. And perhaps that was the point. Meghan had long maintained that the royal institution robbed her of the ability to speak freely. This project, according to people close to her, was her unfiltered voice. No interviews. No journalists twisting headlines. No palace press officers rewriting her statements. Just her story, through characters she could shape, in a world she could control. It was not just a passion project, it was a reclamation of agency. She envisioned herself not just as the producer, but potentially as the director. Whether she would act in the film was undecided, but she didn't rule it out. Her conversations with advisors suggested she was willing to play a supporting character, perhaps as an older, wiser version of the protagonist in a time-jump framing device. Symbolically, it would have been powerful, Meghan, guiding the fictionalized version of herself, coaching her through escape. But where others saw art, Tyler Perry saw risk. And not just financial. After receiving the treatment and early script, Perry's camp reportedly conducted an internal review, one that assessed not only production logistics but also reputational fallout. They looked at past headlines. They mapped out potential reactions from the British media. They even explored the possibility of defamation claims, should the royal family decide the parallels were too pointed to ignore. Though the script carefully avoided using real names or direct quotes, the blueprint was clear enough to cause concern. One of the most discussed scenes in the script, according to sources, involved the protagonist's attempted suicide. In it, she walks alone through a lavish hallway, silent tears falling as distant palace bells chime coldly in the background. She pauses at a tall window, looks down at the courtyard below, and considers ending everything. The silence is deafening. She's interrupted by a knock on the door, not from a family member, but a staffer, reminding her she's late for a public engagement. She wipes her tears, turns, and says, "Of course. Let's pretend." To some, that's a cinematic masterpiece. To others, it's a direct dramatization of Meghan's own admission during the Oprah interview that she had suicidal thoughts and was denied help. It's one thing to speak it, another to reenact it in a film. This was the tightrope Meghan walked with the institution. Every moment, every line, every symbolic piece of dialogue invited the question, is this truth or revenge? To complicate matters, Meghan reportedly wanted the film released not through a traditional studio, but through a grassroots debut, perhaps at a major international film festival like Sundance, Venice, or TIFF. Her vision was to allow the work to speak for itself, away from Hollywood gatekeepers and tabloid culture. She wanted the audience to feel the rawness before critics could dissect it. The plan was ambitious and costly. That's when she approached Perry. Her request, as outlined previously, was simple but significant: space. She didn't ask for money. She didn't seek Perry's endorsement. She only wanted to use one of the smaller sound stages on his Atlanta lot for a controlled production schedule. She argued that it would be a low-disruption shoot. Just a few key sets. A skeleton crew. Total privacy. But privacy wasn't the issue. Message was. For Perry, allowing such a film to be shot on his property, even quietly, was an indirect endorsement. His studio wasn't just a rental property. It was a symbol of Black creative independence. A cultural beacon. A place where gospel choirs often performed just feet away from where sitcoms and dramas were filmed. His brand was built on uplifting stories, even painful ones, but stories that ultimately pointed toward forgiveness, redemption, and family healing. Meghan's film, for all its artistic beauty, felt different. It ended with an escape, not reconciliation. The family that tormented the protagonist was never held accountable. The heroine left, not with closure, but with scars. In some drafts, the film closed with the main character staring into the camera, saying, "You think you know me, but you only know the silence I was forced to keep." It was poetic, but it was also pointed. Perry, after consultation, passed on the project. His refusal wasn't personal, it was protective. He saw a storm coming, a media frenzy, a royal response, a new round of tabloid wars, headlines, lawsuits, backlash. He wasn't afraid for himself. He was afraid for the legacy of what he had built, an empire created not to attack, but to elevate. His silence following the rejection was calculated. He made no public comment, no vague Instagram posts, no anonymous sources defending his decision. He knew the weight of what he had declined. And he also knew that declining someone you once saved is never clean. The world wouldn't see nuance, they would see betrayal or judgment. But Perry had drawn a line. And Meghan, for the first time in their relationship, found herself on the other side of it. The moment Tyler Perry finished reading the final page of Meghan Markle's script, he reportedly sat in silence for a long time. The silence wasn't one of admiration or reflection. It was the stillness of discomfort. There, in his hands, was a narrative that blurred the lines between fiction and vendetta. To some, it might have read as a powerful modern fable. But to Perry, it felt more like a fuse, one that, if lit, could detonate everything he had spent decades building. Perry was not unfamiliar with controversial material. His filmography, though often comedic and formulaic, wasn't devoid of conflict or pain. Many of his films, especially those centered around the Black family experience, dove into themes of abuse, betrayal, addiction, and emotional recovery. He knew how to tell raw stories. He understood darkness. But the stories he chose to tell always carried with them an element of redemption. The arcs bent toward healing, even if the journey was treacherous. What he read in Meghan's proposal was different. It was polished, yes, structured with the discipline of someone who had studied both screenwriting and storytelling with intention. But it was also deeply accusatory. Not in its wording, necessarily, but in its undertone. The institution depicted in the screenplay wasn't just a fictional palace, it was an antagonistic force. Cold, calculating, indifferent to the humanity of the woman it absorbed. The family, faceless for the most part, seemed more concerned with protocol than people, optics than outcomes. The royal system wasn't a backdrop, it was the villain. The protagonist, clearly based on Meghan, didn't just suffer, she was nearly destroyed. Her journey wasn't one of gradual loss but sudden, shocking dehumanization. And while the story had a third-act turning point, a triumphant escape and a monologue about reclaiming power, it didn't offer much in the way of resolution. The institution she fled remained untouched. There was no challenge, no confrontation, just exile. Quiet, devastating exile. Perry reportedly closed the script and asked for a day to think it over. That day turned into 3. He didn't rush to respond. That wasn't his style. Instead, he called in his most trusted advisors, his legal counsel, his creative directors, his longtime producing partners. He walked them through the script page by page. Their reactions mirrored his own. Powerful, yes, but potentially explosive in ways that could backfire. For Perry, the issue was twofold. First, there was the ethical consideration. Was it appropriate to help create something that, while fictionalized, could so clearly be interpreted as a revenge piece? Was this a work of art, or a veiled attack on a family and institution still very much active and watching? Could he allow his studio, a place he had worked to make sacred for artists of all backgrounds, to become ground zero for what might turn into another public war? Second, there was the business risk. Perry had spent years curating a brand that transcended the typical Hollywood template. His productions weren't just content. They were cultural moments for Black audiences and families who rarely saw themselves reflected in traditional studio fare. His name carried weight not just in creative spaces, but also in corporate boardrooms, political discussions, and community-driven philanthropy. He wasn't merely a filmmaker. He was a symbol. And this film, for all its ambition, threatened to put a crack in that symbol. What troubled Perry most, insiders say, wasn't the content itself but the potential consequences. He envisioned headlines. Tyler Perry backs Meghan's royal revenge flick. Perry studio hosts palace takedown. Black Hollywood turns on the crown. None of it was flattering. All of it was distracting. He imagined the hours of press damage control, the calls from donors, the veiled outrage from institutions that had once celebrated his work. And beneath the surface of his discomfort lay something more personal, betrayal. Tyler Perry had opened his home to Meghan and Harry in their darkest hour. He had done so not for fame, not for business, but because he understood what it meant to be hunted by the media and misunderstood by institutions. He did it quietly, expecting nothing in return. In doing so, he aligned himself, publicly, symbolically, with the Sussexes. His support gave them credibility in a world still questioning their motives. So when Meghan returned not to ask for advice or input, but for access to his most prized creative space to produce something so closely tied to her royal exit, Perry couldn't help but feel blindsided. He had given her protection. Now, she was asking him to participate. The quiet generosity he once offered was being rewritten into a business opportunity, and he didn't like how that felt. Tyler Perry is known to be deeply spiritual. Those close to him describe him as a man who prays over decisions, who meditates on direction, who often seeks counsel not just from lawyers or artists, but from pastors and faith leaders. This wasn't a simple yes or no for him. It was a moral evaluation. Could he reconcile his values with what was being asked of him? The answer, it turns out, was no. When Perry finally responded to Meghan's team, he did so with professionalism and respect. He didn't condemn the project. He didn't lecture her. He simply stated that he wouldn't be able to provide studio access for this particular film. He cited scheduling conflicts, production limitations, and a general shift in the type of content the studio was focusing on at the time. But the subtext was clear. This was too hot to handle. What followed was a brief, tense silence. Meghan's team, according to insiders, was caught off guard. They had assumed Perry would be open to the idea, if not enthusiastically on board, at least willing to discuss options. Instead, they received a flat rejection cloaked in politeness. There was no negotiation, no offer to revisit the idea later. The door was closed. Tyler Perry had made up his mind, and the discomfort didn't end with the script. The refusal stirred something deeper. It forced Perry to reevaluate his role in the Sussex narrative. Was his past support being used as leverage? Was this a continuation of a relationship or a transaction disguised as friendship? The questions lingered. Meanwhile, Meghan reportedly felt misunderstood. She believed in the power of her story. She believed in the right to reclaim the truth through fiction. And above all, she believed that Perry, given his own journey from pain to power, would understand her need to process trauma through art. That he would see this not as vengeance, but as vision. But Perry, from the moment he finished that script, couldn't shake the feeling that this was a step too far. He didn't want to become part of another royal controversy. He didn't want to be dragged into a media cycle he couldn't control. And above all, he didn't want to betray the spiritual and creative sanctuary he had worked so hard to build. It wasn't personal. It was protective. His silence in the days that followed was strategic. He didn't respond to inquiries from associates who had heard about the pitch. He didn't address speculation. He didn't correct the narrative. He knew that speaking publicly would only draw more attention. The story would either die quietly or be leaked by someone else. But his hands would remain clean. As expected, fragments of the story eventually found their way into the media. Studio leaks, industry chatter, anonymous sources. The picture was pieced together slowly. Meghan had pitched a film. Perry had passed. The reasons were vague, but the implications were massive. And as the press swirled with speculation, Perry remained where he always was, working, building, creating. But the lines had been redrawn. A boundary had been set. After weeks of quiet development, rewrites, and internal team discussions, Meghan Markle's proposal reached a pivotal juncture. She had written, or at least heavily guided, a script that would stir a cultural debate, create a buzz in streaming circles, and stir up controversy for the monarchy. Now she needed a place to make it real. She needed cameras, sets, lighting, and full post-production capabilities. But above all, she needed discretion. The project wasn't just another film. It was a powder keg wrapped in royalty and wrapped again in the volatility of public opinion. Hollywood is not short on studio space. From Burbank to Culver City, from London's Pinewood to Netflix's growing global network of production facilities, options exist. But not all studios are equal, and not all would offer the kind of privacy this film required. Meghan had no interest in media leaks, paparazzi buzz, or technicians leaking plot details on Reddit. The goal was to film quickly, quietly, and on her own terms. That narrowed her options significantly. In the end, one name kept surfacing in conversations with her team, Tyler Perry. Unlike traditional studio executives, Perry owned everything. The studio, the buildings, the land, the crew. He didn't answer to conglomerates, shareholders, or boardroom executives. Tyler Perry Studios in Atlanta was a self-contained film city, 330 acres of secure land with everything from sound stages and editing bays to housing accommodations. It wasn't just big. It was fortress-level private. The kind of place where projects could go in and out without the public knowing anything until the premiere. That privacy had been crucial when Perry housed Meghan and Prince Harry in 2020, offering them shelter while the world speculated about their whereabouts. No tabloids caught wind of their location. No aerial shots exposed them lounging by pools or walking through driveways. It was, for a brief moment in time, the only place on Earth where they could disappear. And now, Meghan hoped that same sanctuary could serve a new purpose. This time, it wasn't about personal safety. It was about creative control. According to multiple sources with knowledge of the outreach, Meghan's representatives approached Perry's office with a formal request to use a small portion of his Atlanta studio for a limited, closed-door shoot lasting roughly 4 to 6 weeks. The shoot would include a skeleton crew, mostly hand-picked professionals loyal to Meghan's brand, with additional support to be hired locally. They asked for the smallest available soundstage, access to editing suites, and restricted badge access to ensure complete confidentiality. The request came with a caveat that turned heads. Meghan asked to use the studio space without paying commercial rates. Not just at a discount, ideally at no cost. She positioned the project as one of artistic and social significance. Her team emphasized that this wasn't a Netflix-level commercial production, but an intimate film with an important message about identity, resilience, and systems of power. They argued that Perry's studio would be more than a location. It would be a safe haven for a story that needed to be told without interference. On paper, it seemed logical. Perry had supported Meghan before. He had housed her and Harry when they needed protection. He had reportedly sympathized with their account of royal mistreatment. Offering a filming space, in Meghan's eyes, was just an extension of the generosity he had already shown. But what Meghan's team may not have fully grasped was how much had changed in Perry's world since 2020. Back then, he was acting as a friend and humanitarian. Now, he was acting as a mogul overseeing one of the fastest-growing production ecosystems in the country. Every square inch of his studio property was in demand by major networks, studios, and streaming services. At any given time, multiple shows, films, and events were scheduled months in advance. The space was a business, not a favor machine. And a film as potentially polarizing as Meghan's could ripple far beyond a few occupied stages. From the outset, Perry's internal team flagged concerns. Not only was the request for free access unconventional, it carried reputational risk. The studio was booked by major industry players, BET, Netflix, Paramount, and others. Any association with Meghan's dramatized portrayal of the royal family, even indirectly, could cause ripple effects in executive suites. Some corporations might see the move as politically risky. Others might fear being dragged into royal disputes that still commanded global attention. More importantly, Perry's leadership team warned that once the news leaked, and it inevitably would, it would dominate the narrative about the studio. The focus would shift from Perry's many philanthropic and creative initiatives to one question: why had he allowed his studio to be the birthplace of another public strike against the British monarchy? Perry, reportedly, didn't make his decision based on corporate pressure. In fact, he didn't consult with studio partners before declining. He made the decision in the same way he had built his career, from instinct. He read the proposal. He reviewed the shooting plan. He looked at the overall narrative arc of the film. Then he said no. The rejection was conveyed respectfully. There was no scolding, no accusations, just a firm refusal. Perry's office emphasized that the studio was booked, that future availability would be limited, and that the project's sensitive nature made it incompatible with the studio's current priorities. But beneath the professional tone, there was a subtext Meghan couldn't ignore. For Perry, this wasn't a matter of logistics. It was a matter of legacy. Perry's brand, while built on personal storytelling, was never built on vendettas. His movies, plays, and shows often featured flawed characters and broken families. But the resolution always leaned toward redemption. No matter how dark the conflict, his characters found reconciliation, peace, or at the very least, self-ownership. Meghan's script, while undeniably powerful, offered no such closure. It ended with a woman escaping, but never healing. The family remained the villain. The system remained cruel. The palace remained untouched, unchanged, unrepentant. It was, in Perry's mind, a film with no spiritual exit. This made the request for free access even more difficult to entertain. It wasn't just about space, it was about alignment. By hosting the production, Perry would implicitly be lending his brand to the project. People would assume he supported the message, even if he never issued a statement. His name would be dragged into commentary, clickbait, and online debates. His reputation, already hard-won and delicately balanced, would become a subplot in Meghan's ongoing media narrative, and he was unwilling to take that risk. After the rejection, there were no fireworks. Meghan did not publicly express frustration. Perry did not release a carefully worded statement. But the silence between them spoke volumes. According to individuals close to both camps, the tone of communication shifted. It became more formal, less friendly. The kind of tone that signaled a cooling relationship, not hostile, but no longer warm. Perry, ever media savvy, knew the story would leak eventually. And it did. Insiders began hinting to media outlets that Meghan had approached Perry with a film request and been turned down. At first, the headlines were cautious. Then they grew bolder. Some painted Perry as someone who had finally drawn a line. Others cast Meghan as presumptive, expecting loyalty and access simply because of past support. Few knew the full truth. Even fewer knew what the script really contained. But what the public did understand was that something had shifted. One of Meghan's most powerful allies had declined to participate in her most personal project to date. And that decision sent a clear message, one more powerful than any tweet or press release could have conveyed. It said, "You may have a story to tell, but not in my house." Long before Tyler Perry personally declined Meghan Markle's proposal, his inner circle had already begun sounding alarm bells. These weren't impulsive reactions or snap judgments. They were careful, measured assessments from professionals who had worked with Perry through decades of growth, risk, and empire building. When Meghan's request first came through, asking for access to his studio facilities, potentially for free. There was no immediate pushback. The initial response was curiosity. But the deeper Perry's team dove into the project, the louder their concerns became. Perry's executive team is known for its loyalty and discretion. They are not the types to speak to tabloids or drop hints on social media. These are professionals, studio veterans, brand strategists, legal experts, whose job it is to protect Perry's legacy, business interests, and cultural footprint. When the script Meghan submitted began circulating internally, the mood in the office quickly changed from neutral to cautious. The red flags were subtle at first, embedded in tone, theme, and implication rather than direct content. But as the team reviewed the screenplay more closely, they began identifying clear indicators that this film could trigger international backlash. It wasn't just a story, it was a provocation. And that distinction made all the difference. The first serious conversation took place in Perry's private boardroom on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. The agenda had originally been focused on upcoming releases, potential collaborations with streaming platforms, and scheduling updates for active productions. But halfway through the meeting, the conversation shifted. A senior legal advisor placed Meghan's proposal on the table. He had spent the weekend reading it, not as a fan or critic, but as a lawyer trained to see the unseen, the implications, the triggers, the lawsuits waiting to happen. His conclusion was blunt. This script is radioactive, he said. The names have been changed, but the references are so thinly veiled that anyone familiar with the royal narrative will immediately connect the dots. There's a risk of defamation claims, even if they don't hold in court. And the optics, those will be far harder to defend. Others in the room nodded. One executive, who had helped oversee brand integrity for Perry's studio for more than a decade, raised another concern. We've built this brand on stories of faith, forgiveness, family, and resilience. Even when the subject matter is dark, the arc always points toward light. This film doesn't do that. It ends in bitterness. It doesn't heal, it accuses. And if it's shot here, even in secret, our brand will carry that tone. Another staffer, young, ambitious, but fiercely protective of Perry's image, voiced what others had been thinking. She's using this place as a symbol. It won't just be about filming logistics. The media will frame this as a Perry-backed project. And we won't be able to control that once it starts. The discussion grew tense, not because there was conflict among the team, but because everyone understood the stakes. Perry had helped Meghan before, generously and without asking for attention. But that help had created a public link between them, one that would now be impossible to undo if the studio appeared in the credits of a film clearly targeting the monarchy. And then there was the question of timing. At the time Meghan made her request, Perry was involved in several high-profile initiatives. He had just signed a multi-project deal with Amazon Studios. He was in early talks about a politically themed television drama. His studio was set to host major events for international media partners. The last thing anyone on his team wanted was a tabloid-fueled controversy exploding in the background. They began drafting scenarios. If Meghan's film was produced at the studio, even under secrecy, what would the fallout look like? Would tabloid drones fly overhead? Would international outlets begin tracing financial ties? Would British publications paint Perry as a new antagonist in the royal saga? Would Buckingham Palace quietly blacklist him from future collaborations or events? Every angle led to the same conclusion. The risk was not worth the reward. From a business standpoint, Meghan's project offered no immediate upside. There was no studio partnership, no distribution deal signed in advance, no equity stake offered to Perry. From a creative standpoint, Perry would have little control over the narrative. He wasn't directing. He wasn't producing. He wasn't editing. He would simply be providing the physical space and absorbing all the consequences of that association. By the time Perry himself sat down with his top advisors, they had already prepared a full internal memo. It detailed the concerns, outlined the risks, and included references to public reactions from Meghan's past media appearances. They also compiled legal case studies from similar real-life to fiction scenarios where productions ended up in court because fictional characters were too closely based on real individuals. Perry listened quietly. He flipped through the documents. He asked a few pointed questions. Then he leaned back in his chair and said what would soon become the studio's final stance. I can't allow this story to be told here. Not like this. Not through us. It was a short sentence, but it carried the full weight of years of calculated branding, community responsibility, and creative discernment. No one in the room disagreed. The following day, Perry's team drafted a formal response to Meghan's representatives. The letter was respectful. It praised her courage, acknowledged her right to creative expression, and thanked her for considering the studio. But it also made clear that the project didn't align with the studio's current vision or slate of work. They offered no timeline for reconsideration, no invitation to revise and resubmit. It was a firm, final no. From that point forward, the script was never discussed again in Perry's executive meetings. The file was archived. The team was instructed not to discuss the proposal publicly or privately. No one leaked. No one gloated. They simply moved on. But among themselves, they understood what had really happened. This wasn't just about declining a film. It was about defining a boundary. Tyler Perry Studios had grown beyond one man's journey. It was now a cultural institution with its own rhythm, integrity, and code. And while it remained open to stories of pain and trauma, it would not become a stage for personal war, no matter how justified that war may have felt to those involved. The team's decision reflected not just caution, but principle. They recognized that Perry's name had weight not only in Hollywood, but in political circles, faith communities, and international humanitarian efforts. They knew that aligning with Meghan's film could spark a new cycle of noise that would drown out the very voices Perry had worked so hard to amplify, those of underrepresented writers, emerging Black directors, and communities seeking stories of hope. That, more than anything, made the choice clear. Tyler Perry Studios would not be the arena for Meghan's next battle. Silence, especially in Hollywood, rarely lasts. For a time, Meghan Markle's film proposal, centered on a veiled portrayal of her royal life, remained confined to a select circle, her inner team, a handful of trusted advisors, and the leadership at Tyler Perry Studios. But as always in the industry, the more secretive the material, the more valuable it becomes once it escapes. And in this case, the leak did not come from Perry's camp. It came from within the entertainment underworld, those quiet corridors where agents, assistants, and mid-level execs trade information for influence. The first breach was subtle. A small paragraph buried in a blind gossip column hinted at a royal revenge project being shopped around Los Angeles. No names, no details, just the suggestion that a certain duchess was moving beyond documentaries and into scripted film. At the time, the entertainment world shrugged. Rumors of royal-adjacent productions were not new. But then came the leak that changed everything. Pages of the actual script began surfacing. At first, it was only a handful, 5 or 6 scenes passed among writers' groups and Hollywood whisper networks. But those pages revealed something explosive. They were not speculative fiction. They were nearly biographical in tone and narrative, with characters that mirrored real-world figures down to their speech patterns and personalities. Though the names were changed, it was clear who was who. The protagonist, known as Elena, was biracial, American, and fiercely independent. She marries into a powerful European monarchy and soon finds herself navigating a toxic maze of palace politics, manipulation, and racial tension. Within days, the pages were everywhere, emailed between assistants, posted anonymously on private forums, even discussed in screenwriting workshops. Industry veterans were stunned not just by the resemblance to Meghan's real life, but by how brazenly it was structured as a takedown. One leaked scene, in particular, sparked intense chatter. In it, Elena is warned by a senior palace aide that her growing popularity has disrupted the ancient equilibrium. The aide delivers a chilling line, "Your Grace, it's not personal, it's the institution. You weren't meant to shine brighter than the crown." For anyone familiar with the infamous, there are conversations about how dark your baby's skin might be, remark from Meghan and Harry's Oprah interview. This dialogue hit far too close. In another scene, the fictional queen, a towering, silent woman always seen through frosted glass, holds a private conversation with Elena, where she gently reminds her that duty is not about happiness. It's about survival. The metaphors were sharp, deliberate, and unmistakable. Every moment in the leaked pages was designed to mirror something that had either been reported, speculated, or directly stated in interviews Meghan had done since her royal exit. Then came the email leak. An unnamed employee at a major talent agency accidentally, or intentionally, forwarded a string of internal communications discussing the script's circulation. The emails confirmed the origin of the project. It had indeed been submitted by Meghan's representatives. It confirmed the title under development, the institution. And more alarmingly, it confirmed that several major studios had already passed on the project, citing potential backlash. Among the recipients of those emails was a junior development executive who quietly sent screenshots to a blog that focuses on Hollywood industry leaks. The blog, though not mainstream, had a large and loyal readership. Within 24 hours, its homepage was plastered with quotes from the leaked script and commentary about how Perry's studio had also passed. This was the spark. Suddenly, news sites began publishing headlines. Meghan Markle's royal revenge movie? Whispers of explosive scripts stir Hollywood and Buckingham. Is the institution Meghan's final word on the crown? Overnight, a project that was once a private plea to Tyler Perry had become an international flashpoint. And the leak wasn't done. A separate source, this one reportedly a contractor involved with one of the production service firms Meghan's team had contacted, shared access to an earlier draft of the script. That version revealed additional scenes that had been cut or revised in later drafts. One of the most talked about was a climactic moment where the protagonist suffers a nervous breakdown during a royal gala, stepping off stage in the middle of a speech and locking herself in a bathroom while cameras continue to roll outside. The imagery was brutal. The emotional tension, palpable. Critics and fans alike began dissecting each scene as a potential allegory for Meghan's real-life struggles with mental health, as discussed in multiple interviews. Even those sympathetic to Meghan's experience raised concerns. Why fictionalize your trauma in a way that so directly mimics real people? Why place thin disguises on recognizable figures and then distribute the material under the veil of fiction? Was this a reclaiming of voice or a strategic assault against those who could never respond? For her supporters, the leaks validated Meghan's courage. They saw a woman finally telling the truth as she experienced it, unconstrained by palace spokespeople or the British media. They viewed the script as a necessary act of cultural rebellion, an artistic rebellion. But for others, especially those in neutral or royalist camps, the leaks confirmed their worst suspicions. Meghan wasn't just healing, she was retaliating. And by using narrative fiction, she was attempting to do so in a way that avoided direct accountability. This growing divide sparked another consequence. Producers and executives began quietly pulling away. Some who had once shown interest in collaborating with Archewell on future projects started distancing themselves, not necessarily out of personal disagreement, but out of professional caution. They didn't want to be the next name dragged into a headline storm because they happened to take a meeting or provide a soundstage. The royal family, for its part, made no comment. As per usual, Buckingham Palace maintained its silence policy regarding unconfirmed media speculation. But insiders close to the palace told reporters off the record that there was deep disappointment about the situation and quiet concern that the Sussexes, particularly Meghan, were becoming too comfortable dramatizing their private disputes with the crown in public forums. And then came the final blow in the string of leaks. A production budget proposal tied to Meghan's script surfaced online. The document showed estimated costs for set design, wardrobe, filming schedules, and even potential festival submissions. Most damning was a section outlining creative vision, which explicitly stated the film was inspired by the author's personal experience navigating oppressive cultural hierarchies.